Welcome to Crossfire. I'm S.D. Cupp on the right.
And I'm Stephanie Cutter on the left. Yes, it's a problem that the government has shut down. But the real problem here is the shutdown of leadership in the Republican Party. Speaker Boehner didn't want to attach Ted Cruz's crazy demands to the budget, but then he did. Speaker Boehner didn't want to shut down the government, but then he did. Now he's denying that there are enough votes in the House to reopen the government without those crazy ideological demands on Obamacare. Listen to what he said on ABC's This Week.
You're not prepared to schedule a clean vote on government funding right now.
There are not the votes in the House to pass a clean CR.
Well, there are enough votes. Every single Democratic member of the House, plus 24 Republicans, have come out in favor of passing a clean CR and ending this shutdown. But we could reopen the government today if only Speaker Boehner would reopen the business of leadership in the House. We could end this right now.
I take issue with the crazy ideological demands part, but putting that aside, all due respect, President Obama's got the bigger problem on his hands, and that's a looming default on our debts, and he knows that that is the bigger problem. And believe me, no matter how incompetent he thinks Republicans are looking over this shutdown, he knows that ultimately it's his credibility and his legacy on the line if we go over that
I think he knows that it's the country's future and our economy that's on the line if we default, which he's telling Republicans don't bring it to the brink.
It's a big problem for him, and he's got to figure out a way to deal with it. In the Crossfire tonight, two senators, Democrat Edward Markey of Massachusetts and Republican Senator John Thune of South Dakota. Senator Markey, to you first. I know it's fashionable to blame Republicans for this shutdown, but the House passed 4 bills to fund the government and then passed more bills to fund pieces of the government to reopen. Harry Reid, who has refused to give those bills a vote, deserves some responsibility here.
Well, what you're saying is that we should wait for the Republican Tea Party members of the House to pick those parts of the government that they like. They send it over to the Senate, and we should just approve those parts of the government. So they send over a bill that says that we should fund the NIH, but we should also take away health care for the poorest children in America, and we should just vote for it. We should not have an EPA. We should not have a Department of Education. We should not have a Department of Energy. But any of the parts that the Tea Party Republicans in the Senate want to support, they should have a vote in the Senate.
Well, why not reopen veteran services? What's the loss for you? Don't you care about refunding those services?
You know how to reopen the Department of Veterans Affairs? Send over a bill that has reopened the government. As Stephanie just said, there are 24 Republicans in the House of Representatives who say that they will open up the whole government. You don't have to just open up the parts that the Republicans like. You can open up the whole government and negotiate responsibly as adults over the remaining issues.
Let's talk about responsibility here. Senator Thune, I want to talk to you about responsibility. SC just made a case that Senator Reid should take responsibility. I'd like to make a case that Ted Cruz should take responsibility.
I'm sure he's happy to.
He's really to blame for the government shutdown. He's the one that demanded that Obamacare be tied to funding the government and providing basic services to the American people. In fact, you signed a letter with him demanding this of the majority leader, that we're not going to pass a budget unless defunding of Obamacare is attached. Where's the responsibility? That's what this comes down to. That's what led us to this point.
That's one of many proposals that's been out there. Defunding, the House has also acted on legislation that would repeal everything for a year.
Yeah.
It would repeal the individual mandate. They have sent lots of proposals
moving the goal line.
over. Well, they've compromised. I mean, every time they sent something back.
On what size of the gun?
Well, no, actually, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, delay really makes a lot of sense. And I know this is probably hard for you, Stephanie, but the president has proposed a delay for the employer mandate. So now you have the president defending big business. And we're out there saying, why shouldn't middle-class Americans have the same thing? If this thing isn't working and it's clear that it's not, you look at what happened, the pileup that they had when they tried to do the sign-ups last week. 41 out of 82 deadlines have been missed with Obamacare. So it makes sense in our view to delay.
The pileup did happen last week because there has been an overwhelming response. And as you know, 98% of businesses already provide health care, so the employer mandate is not fundamental to this bill. However, the question I have for you is, you signed this letter supporting Ted Cruz's holding the government hostage. And then it comes up for a vote in the Senate, and you voted against Ted Cruz. So how does that all fall
Well,
out?
like I said before, we all agree on one thing, and that is Obamacare is harmful to the American people. We're looking for all kinds of ways to get rid of it, and defunding it was one. It didn't have the votes. We obviously have, as I said, put forward other proposals to delay it for a year, to delay the individual mandate. And when it comes to the government shutdown, you know, you got the House of Representatives has sent over now legislation that would open up FEMA legislation that would open up the national parks, legislation that would open up or provide funding for veterans programs, for the National Guard and Reserve. There are a whole series of things that are sitting at the Senate desk that could be picked up today, passed by unanimous consent. There wouldn't be a single Republican that would oppose that. So
You look like you want to jump in here.
Well, look at, we don't need a firing squad for the Affordable Care Act. We just need a geek squad that is put out there just to fix the computers. What they're afraid of is quite simply that it's going to work. In Massachusetts, we have it. 98% of all adults, 99% of all children. That's what they're afraid of, that when people learn about it, they like it. So yesterday's New York Times front page story, very simple three-point plan that the Republicans have. Number one, the Koch brothers and the Tea Party met earlier this year. They put together a blueprint to kill the Affordable Care Act and shut down the government. Step two, send it to all of the Republicans in the Congress. Step three, implement the blueprint and turn out the lights in the government. So here we are, their plan, not compromise, not a conversation, but capitulation. That's what they're looking for. And they had plenty of opportunities all year long, and the Senate Republicans blocked the Democratic budget in the Senate from going over to the Senate 19 times so we could have a conversation.
But
be responsible, keep the government open.
But why would you, when you've delayed so many parts of this already, the President has signed 7 bills into law that have repealed parts of the Affordable Care Act. And the employer mandate was a big deal. I mean, the reason that the President delayed it is because he heard from so many employers, and so did we. All of us out there were hearing this. Why wouldn't it make sense to give this thing a little bit more time, to delay it a year for everybody? Let working class Americans, middle class Americans have the same protections from this that big businesses have gotten. I mean, right now you've got the Democrats here in Washington, D.C. and the President of the United States defending big business and Republicans advocating for middle class Americans.
Well, look at the blueprint on the front page of the New York Times today makes it clear that's not the agenda. The agenda is to kill the Affordable Care Act, to shut down the government to get their way. And if it's delayed a year, any part of it, it's just to have another year where they put together a plan to kill the Affordable Care Act. We can change parts of the Affordable Care Act during the regular legislative process. That's the responsible way to act. But to hold the entire government hostage just as Faneuil Hall shut down, it has Mount Rushmore shut down. But I can only imagine what the 4 presidents up there are looking down and thinking as we're shutting down the government over a one-year delay in the Affordable Care Act. It's absolutely crazy.
I would take issue with the fact that this is Tea Party inspired. I mean, there are lots of people out there. I mean, you look at the public opinion polls, it's overwhelming against Obamacare. And there are a lot of Democrats. You look at what the labor unions have said. Right. The letter that the labor leaders wrote to the president described it as a disaster, that it would create nightmare scenarios, and that it would destroy the backbone of the middle class America, which is the
Tea Party inspiration is to shut down the government. Right. That's the Koch brother Tea Party plan that was on the front page of the New York Times yesterday. No one's denying it. That's what the plan is, to shut down the government.
The American people don't want the government shut down.
Of course
I don't
they
think
don't.
Either one of us,
neither do we.
Regardless of Obamacare, and they don't like what Republicans are doing. But I have a question for you. So are you saying that you will never vote to reopen the government unless Obamacare is attached?
What I'm willing to say is all these things now, I mean, that's the wrong question. Right now the question is, what can we get 218 votes for in the House, and what can we get 60 votes for in the Senate?
You got them.
You've
got 224.
Well, I trust the Speaker's got a pretty good sense of where his votes are over there. I would trust him probably more than the White House about where the votes are. But these things have now all collapsed into one issue. We now have the debt limit. We've got the CR. These are things that require negotiation, and we don't have that. I mean, the President said he's not going to negotiate. The Senate Democrats have said we're not going to negotiate.
But these are the budget numbers that you wanted. These are the budget numbers that Republicans wanted.
These are the budget numbers that are law. I mean, it's not a concession when you follow the law, I guess, unless you're the President.
Well, we're going to get to the debt ceiling in a bit, because it is in some sense a separate topic. But Senator Markey, there's some Democratic support to repeal the medical device tax as part of an Obamacare concession to Republicans. I'm a little confused on your position, though, on this issue, because you've said in the past that you're against this device tax, but you voted against repealing it. Just explain why.
Oh, it's simple. Yes, I do want to repeal the medical device tax, but then you have to pay for it. So my suggestion is that we take away the tax breaks for the oil and gas industry, the $29 billion they get, and then take the tax away from the medical device
So why don't we negotiate that, though?
That's what I'm saying. That is what we should be doing. Otherwise, all they've done is take away $30 billion.
That's what Republicans have been asking for.
No.
you open to that?
$29 billion would then come out of the Affordable Care Act that would help poor children
But just
in our
as
country.
President Obama is saying, let's negotiate that later. If this is the thing that can open the government right now, why not say, yes, let's do it, and we'll figure out the details later? That's been President Obama's mantra.
Can I say this? They just came up with this idea like 72 hours ago. This is not a
not only
negotiation.
that-
Repeal the medical device tax?
Yeah, in terms of not having
Congress has been voting on it for 2 years now.
You can't shut down the entire government over a 72-hour-old idea that has not been raised before now, and know that there is a way in which you can negotiate it, but you don't have to keep the government closed.
Let's be clear. First, this was about defunding Obamacare, which is really about repealing Obamacare. Then it's about a delay in Obamacare. Now it's about a medical device tax.
Right.
So what is this about?
The medical device tax
this
has
is
been
not
voted
about
on. I mean, it was
spending.
voted on
this is
earlier
not about
this year
this is
in
about
your
shutting
state.
down government. But you know, Senator Markey, you had a good idea there. Repeal the medical device tax, but pay for it with taking away the tax breaks that oil and gas get. Is that something that you'd be open to?
I think we ought to find something that there is common ground on, and
Yes.
repealing
We're
the medical
trying.
device tax is one.
Right.
There were 34
How would you pay for
Democrats,
it?
and it didn't come up 72 hours ago. There were 34 Democrats on the budget this year that voted to repeal the medical device tax, or as we like to refer to it, the pacemaker tax, or the tax on insulin pumps, because that's what it is. But there are lots of offsets that have been proposed. There's some folks in the House of Representatives that have proposed an offset. There are a lot of
But
Republicans.
it's very interesting that
there are a lot
the
of Republicans
Democratic
who would-
line now is, but how would you pay for it?
Well,
Yes,
and there-
exactly.
and there-
That's
and
what
there-
we
and there are a lot of
look at.
The Republicans could have very simply proposed a cut in the medical device tax and a substitution of where the revenues was going to come from and put that out on the floor. Guess what? That would probably pass. What they're saying is we're going to steal all the revenues from the programs that take care of the poorest children in America to make sure that they have health care.
That's
That
where
is
the
not a
money goes.
responsible
That's where the
amendment,
money
and
goes.
that's the amendment that I vote against.
But
I cannot support
I'll
something
just
that
remind
hurts
you-
poor children, poor people all across our
Senator
country.
Markey, I'll just remind you that 30 plus of your colleagues,
wait a minute.
Democrats in the Senate, voted to repeal that medical device tax.
This is an
With a pay
awful
for it.
tax on gross revenues. It's on top line sales. This is gutting.
All right,
medical
we got-
research
we
We
got-
and
can
technology
repeal
in
it,
this
but you
country.
have to find the
We
30
will continue
billion.
this conversation. Senator Ted Cruz just laid out his new bargaining line about raising the debt limit. At least one of us sitting at this table doesn't buy all of his conditions. You'll be surprised to learn who that is next. Welcome back to Crossfire. We are 7 days into the partial shutdown, but the real crisis is still on the horizon. I was with Ted Cruz on attaching Obamacare to the shutdown. I am not with him on attaching it to the debt limit fight. Why? Shutdown, fake crisis. Debt limit, real crisis. Listen to his new bargaining line.
Number one, we should look for some significant structural plan to reduce government spending. Number two, we should avoid new taxes. And number three, we should look for ways to mitigate the harms from Obamacare.
Senator Markey, I agree. Republicans should get something out of this debt limit fight because we cannot keep raising our debt without getting spending cuts or deficit reduction, some entitlement reform. But one of the other things that they've proposed is a yes or no vote on the Keystone Pipeline. I know that's something that you oppose. Would you go to default over the Keystone Pipeline?
You cannot negotiate with a gun at your head. It's not the way to debate our energy and environmental policy for the United States of America. There can be a vote on the Keystone Pipeline anytime the Republicans in the Senate or the House, want to make a fight over that. But attaching it to the shutdown of the government, attaching it to the full faith and credit of the United States of America, the currency for the world, by the way. The world will start to have a Maalox moment in the marketplace of nervousness. Every finance minister will start to wonder about all the money that they have invested here in our country. So you just can't do that. And again, as I'm saying to you earlier, you're never going to see the Republicans in the House send over a bill that keeps open the EPA or keeps open the Department of Energy because they just won't talk about those issues responsibly. So the Keystone Pipeline is in that category. We should have that discussion. I'll tell you one other thing. The Keystone Pipeline, as it's presently constructed and planned by the Republicans and their support, does not keep the oil in the United States. I keep making an amendment to say all the oil must stay in the United States, and almost every single Republican votes no, that it shouldn't stay in the United States. So what's the point of running all the environmental risk, having the oil go down to Port Arthur, Texas, and then having it sent out of our country? Where is the national security? Where is the energy? Where is the economic benefit for our country? And both TransCanada and all of the energy companies oppose keeping it in our country.
Well, there are 4 environmental impact studies that have been done now, all of which have concluded there would be minimal impact to the environment. But more importantly, too, I mean, just as importantly, it's about jobs. It's about the economy. I mean, energy is a competitive advantage to us against our global competitors. It's also something that, according to the President's own State Department, would create 42,000 jobs, construction jobs, soon as they decide to move forward with it. So those are things that are good for the economy. And when we think about this debt limit discussion, of the 53 times that the debt limit's been raised since 1978, 27 times something has been attached to it. Policy issues. Most cases dealing with deficit reduction. All the big budget deals were done that way. 1985, Grand Ribbon Hollings, you had a Democrat House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican President. But that was done in association with the debt limit. We ought to do things that are good for reforming our spending, getting our country on a better fiscal trajectory, and growing jobs in the economy. And Keystone Pipeline is one of those things on that list. But to say I'm not going to negotiate, I mean, it defies history. 27 times out of the 53,
well,
there's been
the president's
something
acting
attached
like
to
this
it.
is some novel request.
I just want to say very briefly, we export young men and women over to the Middle East to protect those ships that bring oil into our country. I don't think it's right for us to be exporting oil out of the United States while we have young men and women over in the Middle East. That oil should stay here. And the Republican Party and the American Petroleum Institute, they oppose keeping the oil here. And that is just plain wrong.
And we certainly should not be bringing the economy to the brink just to get a pipeline established. And so, Senator Thune, I want to bring up something that
It's not just about a pipeline, by the way.
I want to, and full disclosure, in the interest of being transparent here, I do a little work on opposing the Keystone Pipeline, so I'm with you, Senator Markey. Senator Thune, in 2011, when you were trying to convince your House and Senate Republicans to not bring the economy to the brink, to go ahead and pass this debt limit, here's what you said. You said, you know, there's too much risk associated with that, and the focus here needs to be on the economic security of Americans and not politics. How is today any different when Republicans, in their demands for an increase in the debt limit, which is basically just paying the bills that they've already incurred, a list of political demands including Keystone, medical device tax, all of these things that are their political wish list, how is this not about politics?
Well, it's about the economy, it's about jobs, about are we going to do something that's going to secure a better future for our children and grandchildren. You know, the president is asking for what would be the equivalent of $1 trillion increase in our debt limit, which, by the way, is so we can incur obligations and liabilities in the future. So, you know, the bills are going to get paid, the debt holders are going to get paid. The important thing, though, is when you do a debt limit increase, you take a look at what's causing the debt and try and do something about it. And we have an opportunity here to put in place some spending reforms to grow the economy at a faster rate, which will help us deal with the deficits and the debts that we're running right now. But to your point, Stephanie, if you look at past statements, the president in 2006 said that voting to raise the debt limit would be a failure of leadership. He called it unpatriotic.
But
and now he's saying, I want a clean debt limit. I don't want any discussion.
He didn't hold the debt limit hostage.
No, but to that point, Senator Markey, I mean, to Senator Thune's point, Senator Obama voted against raising the debt ceiling in 2006. Vice President Joe Biden voted 3 times against raising the debt ceiling. Harry Reid twice, Nancy Pelosi once in 2004. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but you voted against bills that would have raised the debt ceiling in 2005, 4, 3, 2, and 1997. Why is now the first time anyone's ever wanted to debate raising the debt ceiling?
We just went through this in 2011.
Right.
We already saw the stock market drop 2,000 points. We already saw markets tremble across the entire planet. We just did it. We understand what the consequences
Why
are.
are the
And so
consequences today
the
different
point
than
is
they
that
were those
we've
6
just-
votes you took to not to raise the debt ceiling?
We have just learned this lesson in 2011. Both Democrats and Republicans who might have had any views in the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s, we just went through it. You don't want to repeat history. I agree with you. We should not attach anything to the debt ceiling. It would be irresponsible.
No, that's not what I say.
It would be
We don't want to default.
We don't want to default.
We should attach some spending cuts and deficit
But we
percentages to the debt
we
ceiling.
cannot have
And
a
that's been
default
done more
on-
than 20 times.
Right, but
It's a
there's
John-
not a
Raise the
threat.
debt
There's
ceiling.
never a threat of default.
By the way, of those 20 times, more often when the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress than not. I mean, the huge majority of this has been on when Democrats had control of Congress. There is history to this, there is precedent to this, and all the big budget deals
Right.
going back to 1985 came as a result of being done in association with the
because Democrats
Democrats.
were doing that responsibly. They weren't threatening default.
Oh, okay.
But I do
That's
want
always
to
the case.
come back to something that you said, Senator Thune. You said this is about incurring future spending. We will still be able to pay our bills. So are you saying that not increasing the debt limit, risking default in our debt is not catastrophic?
No, I'm saying it's, of course, I'm saying we need to raise the debt limit. Of course we need to pay our bills. Of course we want to make sure that we don't default. But we ought to do something about the debt.
So-
And it's like increasing the amount that you can charge on your credit card. It's so that we can borrow money in the future to pay our bills. But saying that we can't pay
Bills
our
that
past
we-
bills.
bills that we've already
can't
incurred.
that we can't
Bills
pay
that
our
we've
past
already
bills.
incurred.
It's future borrowing
We've already
authority.
racked this stuff up.
It's future borrowing authority.
So one last question for you. There's reports that Senator Reid may bring up a clean debt limit bill in the Senate this week. Are you saying that you're going to vote against that?
I don't think it'll pass in the Senate.
Are you going to vote against it?
Well, I'll look at what he brings up, but I don't.
A clean debt limit.
I want to see us have a discussion and debate about what we're going to do to reduce the debt in association with raising the debt limit. And by the way, the American people agree with that by 2-to-1 margin. And the other thing I want to point out is this is the kind of thing that requires engagement by the president. And when the president says, I am not going to negotiate, the Senate Democrats say I'm not going to negotiate. Now, if it's so hard for him to pick up the
We're gonna have
phone
to
and call John Boehner, I'd be happy to slip a note to the Speaker.
No,
from
you're
the
right. Those are
President if that's what
conversation
is
enders.
necessary.
The president is ready to negotiate, just not at the cost of our entire economy being put
Right.
at risk. He is saying, please sit down. We'll talk about oil company
Do
tax
what I
breaks.
ask
We'll
first,
talk
and then
about
we'll
the
talk
defense
about
budget,
the things
but you
also
cannot
had-
do it with a gun to your
We gotta go.
head.
We gotta
because
go.
The price will be paid by the
Thanks
American
to
economy.
Senators Edward Markey and John Thune. Thank you for missing the start of the Red Sox game.
Yeah,
Next, we
No greater
ceasefire.
sacrifice.
I hear you.